One of the most fundamental concepts in human physiology is the idea that your body needs energy in order to get things done. You've experienced this throughout your entire life, right? So if you want to go out and mow the yard, if you want to go work out, if you want to run a marathon, if you want to do basically anything, you need energy to get things done, right? And everyone has experienced the sensation of not having enough energy, right? You don't feel like doing anything, you feel incapable of doing stuff, right? So that should be a feeling and a sensation that's already very familiar to you. What maybe isn't familiar to you is the idea that even when you're not doing anything, your body is continuing to use energy to get things done. If you were to actually ask your body if you could, your body would tell you that it's a lot of work just keeping you alive. There are a lot of things going on inside your body, which we'll refer to as metabolism. There are a lot of things going on inside your body that require a lot of energy. So the major concept that comes up in your introduction into human physiology is the concept of energy and how energy is used by the cells in your body in order to get things done. A good way of thinking about how your body uses energy is to think about the idea of a ball either rolling down a hill or pushing a ball up a hill. So you can basically boil down biological processes into two different types of processes. Some biological processes are kind of like pushing a ball down a hill. If you've ever taken a ball and rolled it down a hill, you're familiar with the concept that you don't really need to give the ball too much of a push, right? You get the ball going, gravity takes care of the rest. The ball rolls downhill. Other biological processes are just the opposite. It's kind of like pushing a ball up the hill. Using this metaphor, you're at least familiar with the idea, and you can at least understand that the ball isn't going to get to the top of the hill unless you physically take it up there. So in a way, we can use energy to describe these two different phenomena. It doesn't really require any energy to get the ball rolling downhill, but it does require energy to get the ball rolling uphill. So when it comes to actual biological processes, they can fall into either of these two different categories here. Some biological processes are easy in that it's very much like a ball rolling downhill and doesn't really require any input of energy on your part, while other processes are just like pushing a ball up the hill. They're somewhat difficult to do, they're not exactly favorable, and they're definitely not going to happen on their own. Therefore, if you want to get those very important biological processes to go, that's going to require an investment of energy on your part. So the real question then becomes, in order to get all of these biological processes to go, especially the ones that are just like pushing a ball up the hill, that begs the question, where do we get the energy? So this is another concept that you should already be familiar with throughout the life that you've led. Where do we get the energy? Well, we get the energy from food, right? So you're familiar with the idea that if you're feeling low on energy, usually getting something to eat will help, right? So what it basically boils down to is that when you eat food, food is a combination of three different types of molecules: carbohydrates, lipids, and protein, right? So the idea here, without going into too much detail on digestion and absorption of nutrients and things like that, things you will definitely cover much later in your study of human physiology, we can break it down like this. Large food molecules and large food particles are broken down in your stomach, in your intestines, until you end up with three very simple types of molecules: monosaccharides, which are the products of carbohydrate digestion; amino acids, the products of protein digestion; and fatty acids, which will mostly be the product of lipid digestion. So in the course of digesting large chunks of food into these three different types of molecules, your body will also absorb these molecules into the bloodstream. So from there, it becomes a question of what do we do with these molecules once they've efficiently been absorbed into the bloodstream? So at this point, you need to think about what your overall goal is here. You eat food for the purpose of harvesting the energy that is present in that food. Okay, well, what is exactly is needing all this energy? And the answer to that is that, okay, all the cells in your body need the energy. You've got trillions of cells inside your body, and they all need and desire energy that is coming from that food. So that's why it's so important that these molecules end up in the bloodstream. The bloodstream is going to deliver all of these nutrient molecules to all the cells in the body. That's the nice thing about the bloodstream. So at this point, here we have an example of one particular type of cell. So just keep in mind, there are trillions of these cells all throughout your body. This is just one representative cell. So any of these three different types of food molecules are going to end up inside of many different cells, especially this one right here. So any of these three molecules will end up inside the cell, but for our purposes for this example, let's use glucose as an example. So glucose is an example of a molecule which you would call a monosaccharide. So glucose and other food molecules are going to get inside of mitochondria. Mitochondria are organelles that are inside of most of your cells, and these are basically like big factories. These factories, these mitochondria, are going to take these food molecules and also use oxygen, which is ultimately coming from the air that you breathe. And we are going to undergo a number of different metabolic reactions. We call this whole process cellular respiration. Glucose and oxygen will be transformed metabolically into carbon dioxide, water, and most importantly, a high energy molecule called ATP. So at this point, if you're just getting going in human physiology, you likely don't really have a firm grasp of what ATP is. So the best way to kind of think about this is very much like your cell's energy currency. So if your cells had money to spend, this is basically what their currency would be. If your cell has a lot of ATP stored up, it is, in a sense, very rich. It's got a lot of built-up energy that it can use to get things done. It can get processes done that are like pushing a ball up the hill. So the most important thing to keep in mind here, and this is going to be very important to keep in mind, especially once you get later into your study of human physiology, when you start to talk about muscle contraction, when you start to talk about the respiratory system and getting oxygen into your bloodstream, you'll notice that in this given process, glucose and oxygen are necessary components in order to make ATP here. Okay, so it is actually possible to make ATP without oxygen. So if you're not getting oxygen effectively delivered to all the cells in your body, your cells will still be able to make ATP, but they won't be able to make nearly as much ATP as they would if oxygen was present. So you're actually going to make six to 8 times less ATP without oxygen than you would if oxygen was present. So this is going to be something to really keep in mind going ahead, not only the idea of why different biological processes need energy, where that energy comes from, but especially later in your study of human physiology, when you need to start considering the ramifications and the repercussions of not getting oxygen effectively delivered to tissue. If you start to run out of oxygen, your cells won't be able to efficiently make ATP, and they're going to run out of energy very easily, and they're not going to be able to do their jobs. So at this point, you just want to make sure you understand the overarching concept of where the energy comes from, what the energy is good for, and then later in your study, you can start to kind of delve deeper into the hidden details here of why oxygen is so important and why the cells need it so bad.